Okay, welcome everybody. This is a really special open house tonight, talking to two chaplains who minister to first responders. And I just want to welcome them and introduce them. I'll introduce them one at a time, and then we'll hear them speak. Um, First up, we're going to have Leslie Hyde, Reverend Leslie, who was ordained from ChIME in 2015. And she served as a mentor at Long Creek Youth Development Center. She was elected a member of the Yarmouth Town Council and was president of the nonprofit Yarmouth Cares About Neighbors for 5 years. She was ordained by ChIME, as you know, in 2015 and has served as the chaplain for the Yarmouth Police Department ever since. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. Um, Hi, nice to see everybody here. Um, I was trying to think, there's so many avenues to go down with law enforcement. I decided that I was going to kind of say how I ended up in law enforcement, how I trained for it, and what I do. And let me start out by saying that when I went to ChIME, I had no clue that I would end up in law enforcement. Absolutely none. And as of now, and two people mentioned it, I am part of the spiritual care corps that Lori Whittemore, because she's a friend of mine, did. And I'm also part of the Red Cross Spiritual Disaster Relief. And I worked with the CDC during the coronavirus on emotional wellness, and I have a grief counseling service called Listening Hearts. And I'm also, because I don't have enough to do, the director of Riverside Cemetery in Yarmouth. And then I'm also the chaplain for the Yarmouth Police Department. But so what happened, and Myra kind of referred to it, is Yarmouth is a lovely small town, and I got elected to town council, and then I started running their nonprofit that has sort of 12 programs, food pantry. I got to know everybody. And in creating the town budget, I met the chief of police, who I really, really liked a lot, Mike Marl. And after I got ordained, by complete serendipity, I was always in town hall because I was kind of the community chaplain. I'd walk around and somebody would go, "Hey, Les, you know, come here for a sec." And I'd know to walk in their office and close the door, and they'd want me to hold space for whatever they were doing. So Mike said, "Hey, Les, come in." And I thought, ooh. And he asked if I would consider, it was very new back then. There were not a lot, certainly not in patriarchal Yarmouth, were there any police chaplains, and there were very few women. So he said, "I would like you to consider this. And if you do, I will sponsor you, because you need a law enforcement agency to sponsor you, to spend a week being trained at the Maine Criminal Justice Academy up in Vassalboro," which was fascinating. And by sheer wonderful fluke, the next week, Kate Braystrup was doing a critical incident stress management debriefing course. And I wasn't supposed to do it because you're supposed to be a chaplain for 5 years. But Mike wrote Kate and said, "Listen, you're going to like her, do it." And Kate became a mentor and a friend of mine, and everybody else in the class was a older male, and they kind of went together, and Kate and I would have lunch together every day for a week, and we just became really good friends. So I started my chaplaincy with literally one of the most famous chaplains in America as my mentor. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. So pre-pandemic, um, I would do ride-alongs. My focus was the officers. My focus was in supporting them, because the stress involved, even in a town like Yarmouth, of being a police officer is very, very high. And so the advantage of a chaplain is they can come tell you things that they might want not to tell a therapist, who might have to report it. and that might imperil their job. But a chaplain, unless I think you are going to be a harm to yourself or someone else, I keep everything completely discreet. And there are, there's a lot of issues that first responders have. They've got terrible hours, their relationships suffer, their kids have issues. There's a lot of stressors that any high stress job has. And so my job was, and I got so much information from Kate, how to help them process this, because these guys will run into a hail of bullets, but they do not want to be around anybody who's openly emotional. If you talk to Kate about critical incident stress management debriefing, when they debrief police after a shooting incident, we don't talk about how did you feel, because they'll shut down. We say, what were you, what was your heart rate like when you got the call? Ask them specific physiological questions, because if you talk about emotions with most policemen, you're not going to get anywhere. So I got to know my guys, which was really lucky through these ride-alongs, because if you're sitting next to somebody as opposed to face, they're much more willing to talk to you. And I found my greatest value to them was holding up a mirror to show them the strengths they didn't realize they had. And as a result, what ChIME lovingly says, growth edges, that those strengths could help them process. So they all sort of understood me, and we had a pretty cozy relationship. But then he retired and the pandemic hit and Black Lives Matter hit, and that had a huge impact on the police department. And the new guy, there were no ride-alongs, there was very little communication. It was a very different situation. And the police is kind of paramilitary, it's top down. So if your chief says, I don't, officers can communicate with you, but you can't communicate with them, that's, you don't sort of argue about it. But what has developed is I still try and support them, but how I do that now is I do the things that I was trained for that they're not. If there's a death in town, and even in Falmouth and Freeport, if there's an unattended death and the police are called, I'm called to chaplain the family. And if there is a death notification, and this is something I got taught by Kate, so again, I was very lucky. And these usually happen at 2 o'clock in the morning. There, but nothing good happens in the middle of the night. So you're literally knocking on someone's door at 2 in the morning, always accompanied by an officer, because sometimes they don't take the news well, and so they want to protect you. And the minute the family opens the door and they see me there, and I'm never wearing a collar, I'm dressed like this, I'm wearing clothes you can cry on, because that's what they're going to do. And they see me and they see an officer, they know something bad has happened. And so I would just, and Kate will tell you this very softly, but you don't drag it out. You just say, I'm really sorry to tell you that, Aaron died of an overdose at 2 o'clock this afternoon in Biddeford. And then this is, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, but Bob will, then you hold space for them. Then you just allow whatever. And the same thing happens when you go to somebody's house and somebody has died. You just make it safe for whatever emotions arise for them to be okay. And this is, that's why Susan and I are so interested in pursuing things. Grief is very much entangled in this, and we do not in this society do a good job in allowing grief to be expressed. If somebody dies and you're sad, often you're kind of treated like it's an illness and you should get better in a couple of days, where grief is a journey. And the way we honor it and hold space for the people who are grieving really helps them process it all. And you can do that for police and for the citizens. So I'm going to leave it there. I know I've hit a bunch of things, but please, if you have questions afterwards, don't hesitate to ask. But I think, I think I've said enough and possibly too much.
Never. Thank you so much, Leslie. And everyone, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers after the presentations. So next up is Bob Kirton, who is a ChIME class of 2020 and currently works as a chaplain for the Chaplaining Fire and Rescue, for Newfield Fire and Rescue, for Ross Corner Fire, and an on-call chaplain for Southern Maine Healthcare, both in Sanford and Biddeford. Due to the nature of the emergencies, this is a real-time support service that's helpful to families in the middle of a crisis. Thank you so much, Bob, for all the service that you and Leslie do. Take it away, Bob.
Thank you. So I'm a graduate of ChIME 2020, which was the beginning of the pandemic. So initially, our class, we met in person, and it was very, very nice. Unfortunately for me, my graduation was by Zoom. Having said that, then the question was, well, what drew me to ChIME? I don't have any pause. I don't have any answers to that question. I do remember sitting in a room listening to a former ChIME graduate talk about ChIME. He was also talking about other things, but ChIME was what caught me. And I did it. I also say that because for 24 years, I was a nurse, and I became a nurse because somebody else said they wanted to be a nurse. And I said, well, I can do that. So my role is a chaplain. For me, there are a couple of things that happen when I'm also a basic EMT. So when I respond to a call, and I agree, it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the mornings when you get these calls. When I respond to a call, my first responsibility is to the patient. If there's enough help there, then I immediately turn to the family. More often than not, the family is very stressed out over what's happening, and they don't understand what's happening or why it's happening or why is it their fault. And that's where I can step in and offer the best help, especially in what we call a code or CPR. When CPR is in progress, and I'll just tell you right up front, it's very nasty. A lot of nasty things happen. And my first goal is to try to get the person or the family members out of the room, if I can. If I can't, that way they don't have to view what's going on. Because in one of the cases, we end up using a drill in the guy's arm or knee, and they just don't understand all of that. And they don't understand why we're doing that. I will explain that to them as we go. However, if I get them out of the room, it makes it a little bit easier. If I can't get them out of the room, I start the conversation with, tell me what's happening. Why did we get called? I don't tell them anything. I just want them to tell me what's going on, and I can validate with them what's going on. And then they'll start asking questions. Well, what are they doing with that drill? Or what are they doing with going down that guy's throat? Or what are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? And that's really my role, is to explain to them what's going on. Now, for me, the beauty of this challenge is when you're ordained, people come to you and say, can you marry us? Or can you conduct a funeral? Or can you do a service for us? And so you do all this pre-planning. But in this case, there is no pre-planning. You're thrown right in. You have no idea what you're going to see when you walk through that door, and you have to deal with it. And for me, that works for me. And so I try to keep an open mind. Whatever it is, and that's where we start. And we start by asking the family what's going on, what's happening tonight, why did we get called? And then start explaining it from there. And just, as I say, keep it cool. And I do that also in the hospital. So I worked in Biddeford today, and I do patient calls, and I walk in, I see people in the ER, I see people up in ICU, and we just chat. I don't explain anything to them. I chat. Why are you here? I already know why they're here because I've already read their chart, but I don't care what that is. Why are you here? And let them tell me. That also tells me whether they're oriented or not. And I'll leave you with one comment, and you can figure it out. If here we go. If I'm playing a game called peekaboo and I get hurt, what department in the hospital would I go to? ICU. I'm sorry. Go ahead. That was that. You got it.
Bob, you said something and then Myra, but first of all, the worst joke I've ever heard.
Thank you. Excellent. I'm glad. But I know you use it.
But you said something that is so important when I talk about this. I am a over preparer. I do sermons, I do funerals, I do services, and I put a lot of energy. I'm a wordsmith. I love all of that, and I'm proud of what I do. But when that phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, I have no idea what's at the other end. And oftentimes dispatch can't give me a lot of information. There was one time I went and they didn't even know when I'm knocking on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning if it's the right parents of
Right.
the people I'm saying your daughter has died of an overdose. What? So I have learned, and this is an absolutely brilliant aspect for me, to trust in that divine download. That I say the same thing every time I get in the car to go somewhere, or the police come to pick me up. I say, dear Lord, please let me get out of the way so you can show up. And once I realized it wasn't about me, once it's like, I don't have to have the right words, I totally trust what happens. Sometimes I don't say anything. Sometimes I go in, everything is different, but I now have profound faith in the exchange because it's not my ego is out of it and something deeper has come in. And that's what you were alluding to. And thank you, because that's a really important part of this.
I have a question.
Okay.
So both of you talked about not being able to prepare for those 2 or 3 a.m. calls. And of course you can't prepare at the moment, but I'm thinking you must have some, I guess, broader preparation in your life to be able to handle those things. And so that's what I'm wondering about. You have some training from ChIME, but how do you train yourself to be able to be present regardless of the situation, regardless of the time, to be able to kind of keep yourself there?
You want me to answer part of that?
Go ahead and I'll riff off of you.
And you'll clean up my mess. So you need to be open about it. I don't have all the answers. I don't claim to have all the answers. I will be there to help and support you. You ask me the questions you need to ask, and I'll help you figure out what's going on. And then, that's part of it. The other part of it is, so the first time I was trained as an EMT was back in 1982. So between 1982 and now, that few years have gone by, I've been on a few calls. So after a while, it begins to, it begins to build up. But don't ever, ever, ever think that this call is going to be exactly like a previous call, because that's how you'll get caught. Each call is its own separate call.
And Catherine, I'm going to add to that for me, and ChIME was a huge help here, knowing what your triggers are, knowing what your fears are, knowing what your shadows are, knowing what you might come up against. I had a call with a 20-year-old beautiful girl who suicided in her bedroom, and the grief of her parents bruised me. I've never had grief that intense. And that's probably the hardest holding space I've ever had. And part of it is because one of my best friends died by suicide. And I think it's really important to know what your triggers are, to know, and you will learn. Bob's absolutely right. As you keep doing each call, you will learn more about yourself. But what ChIME does in such a powerful way is it doesn't let you not look at those dark places, at the shadow work. And I think that this is a place where if you're comfortable to a certain degree with your triggers, it allows you to make a safer space for the people to process their stuff because you're not processing your stuff.
Right. Don't feel threatened by it. Because as we say, it's not you, it's them. You're there to support.
Yeah, so ChIME, being a 2 or more year program, kind of sets the foundation for further training, whether you want to work with first responders or many go on to do clinical pastoral training, which can help you identify triggers, but that each unit is usually 3 months long. So the bulk of your training to be an interfaith minister or a chaplain to first responders or anywhere is a divinity school or the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine. And I just wanted to comment that when I've been in hospice and been in the room with families who are grieving the imminent loss of a loved one, yeah, there's, Leslie, you alluded to it, that getting yourself, your ego out of the way and letting spirit come through and trusting that you have the fortitude and the strength to be there. Before I started doing this kind of work, I thought, well, I can never do that. I'm too sensitive. I couldn't be at the bedside of somebody who's dying. And, you know, maybe some people here tonight are thinking, well, you guys are special people. You can work with first responders. But I feel like what ChIME really helped me see is that I've learned skills that help me realize I just need to show up. I can be totally infallible human me and be there to help somebody, and I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to offer advice. I don't have to do anything other than hold that space for them to feel safe enough to grieve or have whatever they want to say. And so that really helped me learn to show up and just try, yeah, okay, I'll try it. And the first few times I was at a bedside of somebody dying, I came away feeling almost guilty that I felt so rewarded. It's like, oh my gosh, I got so much out of that and I didn't do anything but sit there. Yeah, you can have this kind of work and feel really good about it, about what you're doing.
Well, I'll add to that. There have been times when the tears roll on my face, and I let that happen.
And I think that's really important. I mean, you need to be, above all, you need to be authentic. You just, because they are going to know when you are and when you aren't. And Myra, when you were talking about showing up, it occurs to me, whether you're a chaplain, whether you're a first responder, in this world where there's so much pain and anxiety and loss in everyday life, our ability to simply show up for each other. And it requires just what you're saying. I don't know what to say. I don't even know what's wrong with her, but I'm going to show up, or I'm going to call up and say, you want to have a walk? You want to have tea? How are you doing? And those are all building blocks for chaplaincy. And there are things that we can all do because there are no magic right words. What there is the ability to put yourself in that situation and trust that it's going to unfold as it's supposed to.
Thank you. I'll open it up now for questions for Leslie or Bob. Any other questions? Just go ahead and speak.
I had a question that probably Bob can help with. Bob, you said you've been a EMT since 1982. So do you remember back, I don't know, it was 2010 or 11 during the 7 years that I served, and they clarified the main state protocols that said you talking about the code, and if somebody had a cardiac arrest, you do not put that patient in the ambulance until you get a pulse back. And
I'll jump all over that in a minute.
okay, so but at the time that came out, the everybody freaked out because that meant that you were going to have to pronounce somebody, you know, at the EMT basic level, or and so they sponsored some classes on that, and I retired from that in 2013, but it kind of goes to that spiritual component that the EMTs and the first responders aren't thinking about, because they're having to do all their skills, right? So, but anyway, but it's been over 10 years since I was practicing, so I don't know how that's changed or if it was really followed up on. So go ahead and respond to that.
I will, because there was a point where if the patient was not alive, you could not bring them to the hospital because the hospital would not admit them, because you can't bill a dead person.
Right.
That was the whole theory behind that. That's no longer in a case. But one of the things that is effective now, which I'm happy for, and a lot of the guys that I work with are happy for, they say, just call Bob, he'll deal with it, is that if the family has made arrangements because they knew there was a pending death, and once the deputy, in our case it's the deputy, agrees that everything's fine, we can take that person to the funeral home, which eliminates that whole process of having to get the funeral home to show up. Because sometimes at that hour of the morning, they're like the rest of us, they're all in bed sleeping. So
Yeah,
then
it could take hours.
and
Yeah.
we're already there, so why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've kind of gone by that. That was
Yeah.
never well received, by the way.
It
Because
certainly wasn't when, but at the same time, I was on at least one call where it was chaotic because the family forgot that the patient had a DNR. And so
that's the whole ball game right there.
I'm curious about someone mentioned an internship as part of the ChIME program. I don't remember who talked about it. And so how does that work in regard to someone who has a full-time job doing something else?
Mara, you want to take it, or?
You unmuted first.
Well, it's a really good question. And the first thing I'll say, and okay, I was 2015, so it might have evolved, but they were really flexible about working with you. If you had family situations going on, if your, partner was sick, or you could do something called hearth chaplaincy. You could, they would really work very hard with you to make it. I remember, oh my God, I was, an intern is an unpaid position, and I've been a professional my whole life and made a pretty decent salary, and I got turned down. It got to be a joke in our class, like 30 internships. I couldn't find an internship. And I went to Patricia, the abbess at the time, and said, oh, I thought she was going to kick me out of the program because I couldn't find an internship. And we only had like 6 months before I was going to get ordained, and I'd run out of time. And she was, I'll never forget this. She looked at me and I'm like beside myself. And she said, "Yay. This is the first time I suspect you have well and truly failed. And that is exactly what you're supposed to be learning. So good for you." And I found an internship within a week and everything. But I had never gone to a program where I was supposed to do something and tried really hard and didn't do it, and have the head of that program be happy that I had failed for 6 months. So I don't know if that answers your question, but they will work with you to make it as reasonable and accommodating to your schedule as possible. And Myra,
Thank you.
over to you.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in on that too, because they will. Don't let that internship frighten you or keep you away. Don't worry about that. And Leslie, she got a good learning experience from it, and that's the purpose of the internship. Exactly. Oh, but you know what? She's still alive, isn't she?
And I learned that failing is actually a great learning opportunity. It was a very powerful lesson when Patricia did that with me. I'll never
Exactly,
forget it.
bingo.
Thank you both.
Yes, and well, just to play devil's advocate, I will say that ChIME's requirement is 150 volunteer hours in the first year and in the second year each. So 300 hours total. That being said, you've got the whole school year to do that. So it's about 5 hours a week if you can fit that in somewhere. And like Bob and Leslie said, we really try to work with people who, if they have a lot going on at home, a third of those hours could be what's called hearth chaplaincy. In other words, you're chaplaining your loved ones and your family, and you're doing that kind of work there. And other people have chosen the internship is only in the second year. So the first year is just 150 hours wherever you can grab it. The second year is a little more formalized for accountability. And some of our students are doing self-directed internships. In other words, they don't have a supervisor. They don't go to a hospital or a clinic or anywhere that's going to say, you have to be here at this time and do this. They develop their own plan, like these are my goals and this is what I'm going to achieve in this internship. And then one of the staff at ChIME will be their supervisor for that internship. So there are requirements, but yeah, it's doable.
Very helpful. Thank you all. Thank you all three.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Bob or Leslie or me?
I have another one. I think it's mostly for Leslie. So is the position, you have a position now with the Yarmouth Police Department. Is that position typical for police departments in Maine? Do most departments have somebody like you? And if they do not, how do they meet the needs that you're meeting?
I like you. That's a very good question. I will answer it by saying when I first got taken on by Mike Morrill, who was a very forward-thinking guy, it was not chaplains. Portland had some chaplains. They were mostly men. Older women were not thought of as sort of the right candidates. And actually, I'm just thinking, when I first got on, I took a week-long FBI hostage negotiation training course down in Maryland. So I'm a certified hostage negotiator, never been called. But there were very few chaplains. There are more chaplains now. One of, I think Myra's classmates, Cheryl, was a chaplain in Westbrook for the police. But what's happened now is after sort of Black Lives Matter and then defund the police. And there were all sorts of lenses that they looked at the police through. They recognized that there are a lot of situations where they can be de-escalated. So they don't send in chaplains, but they've started working with social workers because mental illness, what's happened with the police is that it's become a safety net for everything, for homelessness, for mental illness, for domestic violence, for all of the sort of ills that the police need to respond to these things. And sometimes it helps them to have training from a social worker. And so a lot of police forces, the ones who have chaplains rely on their chaplains, but more and more of them are moving into getting social workers on staff to either respond with police and to work with the chaplains. So you can sort of have a little triangle of people. So, and I also think along with that, they are chaplaincy, people like Kate Braestrup, and if you don't know her, she's
Yeah.
amazing. And please read her books and listen to her because she's just her Moth Radio talk on the little boy learning about his friend dying is one of the most powerful talks I've ever heard in my life. And she has been an amazing advocate for chaplaincy and law enforcement. She's the main state game warden chaplain for the entire state. But so yes, it is increasingly being accepted as a way to support police because they just can't do everything. They can't be trained in everything that is required on a daily basis. And by the way, people can, and I'm a little bit of I kind of am protective of my police officers. People can go up and spit in their face. And the police are, their job is to serve and protect. So they have a lot of stressors on them. And so anything that a chaplain, a social worker, part of what I try and do is advocate for more of this happening for police forces, because I think it's really important. And I don't even know if I answered your question. Did I?
So, but just the second part of it is, all right, so if they don't have a position like that, who's filling that? Or is it just left empty? Yeah.
It's left empty.
Yeah.
It's left empty.
Yeah.
And I will say there are police forces where they don't really, if they have a chaplain, they don't always know what to do with them.
Mm.
And that's a little tricky because it is a very top-down organization. So you don't sort of want to go in there and say, okay, listen, we're going to do this, this, and this, because they're the chief and you're not. So you have to be a chaplain with the chief. And that's very hard because it's sort of like the captain of a ship. They're seen as, they've got all the answers. That's sort of what's put on them in that position. So it's very hard for them to let down their guard. So it's an interesting dance you have to do. And Bob, you're not in police, but I wonder if it's easier for a man than a woman. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't mean to make this gender specific at all, but I just sometimes think it might be easier for a police officer to talk to a guy than to a woman.
Oh, I see what you're asking. As long as you're not into a position of power, and as long as they clearly understand that what is said to you ends there. So I know initially when I first started on the fire departments, they didn't know what to do with me.
Right.
Because there was this whole fear that I was going to bring in this God thing, and oh my gosh, we can't have that.
Don't convert me.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And then as they start to, and I don't like to use the term, but then as they start to use you and they realize, oh, you have some value.
Right.
Then
Right.
it works.
Right. And when they realize that you're not going to try and talk to them about religion all the time. That's
Exactly.
not your job. You're not there to, if they want to talk about it, fine, but I'm
Yeah.
not going to bring it up.
Yeah, yeah. I don't
That-
walk in there with a Bible.
Right, right. Good point. Does that help? Okay, good.
So I feel a little crass to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it because I have this wonderful opportunity with you all. For the types of chaplaincy that we're talking about tonight with first responders, um, can that ever be a compensated position, a paid position, or is it always a non-paid? I feel embarrassed to ask, but it's a question I have.
Don't be embarrassed.
Right.
That's a great question.
It is a great question. Bob, I'm going to tell you that when I first came on, and this was a big deal, they paid me $600 a year. And they outfitted me. I have chaplain gear and things. And now I'm bumped up to the immense salary of $1,000 a year. And Yarmouth is a well-to-do town with a very well-funded police. And that's about as good as it gets. I hate to, this is not a job. And I don't know, Bob, maybe it's different for you, but it's not a, I couldn't live on my law enforcement chaplaincy salary.
No, I agree with that. For fire and rescue, no, I'm not compensated. It's a volunteer. At both hospitals, I am compensated. And I don't know, could I live on it? Be close. I know if I go in for a call at night, it's a minimum of $50 for they'll pay me $50 for the call, whether it's a 5-minute call or usually it's 10 or 15 minutes and I'm all done. Now that I'm working there 8 hours a day, you're gonna ask me what they pay me, and I honestly, I don't remember. It just goes into a bank. I don't worry about it. But for fire, on the fire side, no, it's strictly volunteer. Because there's no money in these small towns.
Right.
Thank you.
And I'm not doing it for the money.
Yeah, thank you both.
But that doesn't diminish your question. That's a valid question.
It's a great question.
Yeah, I
I asked it right away.
appreciate.
Good for you.
If nobody else has a question, can I go for number 2? I'm
Sure.
not being greedy. Leslie, when you talked about the suicide and how it hit you, it made me think of how you as a chaplain get care for yourself, which is a general issue throughout all the helping professions, but I'm sure there's some unique aspects when you're serving as in a caring position for first responders in emergency situations. So if there's anything you can elaborate on that.
That is such a great question. And I will say, because I worked with the family for about a week, and then I did it impacted our entire town. So I did a sort of at our church, 300 people, I did a grief thing. And then the dad, I went to his business and talked to his employees before he came back about how they had questions about what should we say and what can't we say, because his daughter had also worked there. So I was very involved in it. And intriguingly, I did not go to my police department for support. Because again, emotions are not their strong suit. I called my best friend, who's not a chaplain, when I came home after the first 2 hours, and she came over, and she took me to Freeport and bought me the hottest, sweetest coffee. I took one sip, it was great, and then I threw it away. And then we just walked around and talked. And then I talked to my other chaplain friends, like Kate Braystrup is a great resource for me. I will talk to other people who have been, and they don't even have to be law enforcement chaplains, people who have experienced profound grief, that kind of grief that sits on your shoulders and wakes you up in the morning. And ask them to help me, process it. And then again, Kate's whoever I think was talking about the critical incident stress management, she's got some really practical, if you're experiencing profound emotion, drink a ton of water. All the hormones that are going through you that are flooding, they're in your system for 72 hours. Flush them out. Walk out in nature. I mean, so a combination of her practical tips and chaplaincy support and friend support and recognizing that you need that support. That's sometimes it's not as big as that suicide, and I don't realize I'm carrying it around until it drops on my foot and breaks my toe. So part of the thing that's important is to recognize how much you're carrying and to process it. But it's not with law enforcement, it's with other chaplains and with your buddies. But great question, Jeffrey. Thank you. Bob, you got anything to add to that?
Nothing intelligent, but I agree with you that for me, it's better to go to, I actually spent a lot of time with a lot of, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but non-trained people who you can speak to, and they're not going to give you the clinical response, because I don't want to hear the clinical response. They're going to give me a response, and sometimes it's a good response.
I have to say that the relationships, the spiritual community that ChIME introduced me to has so many great people and resources in there that a lot of cohorts stay in contact with their classmates. And my graduating class decided we would have a code word, that if we said the code word, that meant stat, we need somebody to help us out quick. And just some graduates, whether they were in the same class or not, co-chaplain each other. And there's a lot of jobs and situations and just life that it's nice to talk to somebody that you can trust.
Yeah, that's the question that interested me the most, actually, when I was listening to you guys talk, is where do you do your own downloads? Who do you have for support? How do you know who's holding up the mirror for you, right? Because we do get triggered, all of those things. And so it's just such an important part of the support when any of us are doing any kind of this kind of work, that there's somewhere to go to be able to process if you need to.
I'm going to say, because Myra's right, I have, after ChIME, I had a dream group that was a lot of ChIME chaplains. I had a moon group that's, Angie and a lot of chaplains. I do a co-chaplaining with one of my classmates that's every 2 weeks. It's an hour and a half. We've been doing it since 2015, and it's the richest conversation just when you think it can't get richer, it does. We call ourselves the Crone's Nest. There are 4 chaplains, all ChIME, who are working on our businesses and careers, and we meet every 2 weeks. So if you want to create places for yourself, and a lot of this happened for me during the pandemic because I live alone, and in case you haven't noticed, I'm a bit of an extrovert. So the pandemic was hard for me because all I saw was postage stamps. So I created or joined these little groups, and they're very helpful for processing. Because if you say, God, I was really triggered and I don't think I handled this well, it's the safest, most compassionate space in the world for people to hold up that mirror to you and show you your strengths and your weaknesses. So ChIME is really powerful that way.
And you're not going to be graded or have to write a paper.
Leslie, you reminded me when COVID hit and online, I saw the funniest thing. It struck me. It said, people contact your extrovert friends. They are not okay. Boy, we've all been through it, through a lot, and it's such a comfort to have again that spiritual community that Chime has become just a broader tribe of people, and there's so much that we give and receive from each other in that. So I've heard Chime called a wisdom school, and that's how I really think of it because it helped me trust that inner voice, that inner intuition. Anyone else have any other questions for Bob or Leslie regarding first responding or for any of this regarding ChIME in particular?
No, but I'm gonna have to jump, but I want to just say thank you again. I'm so excited that I came. It was so nice to listen to you all, and Chime, I have always known it's a very special program. And so I just really enjoyed listening to all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan,
Thanks, guys.
for coming. I want to let everybody know before you go, Susan, too, that in 2 months we're going to have another open house on the third Wednesday, and that is a fairly recent grad, Jane Rogers Ducott, who is going to do a dramatic reading of her book that she wrote and talk about how ChIME helped her creativity and her pet chaplaincy that she's moved into.